Good evening and welcome to Harnessing Abilities, rounding up resources designed specifically for our fantastic folks in Southwest Wisconsin. We are here tonight. We're going to talk about special needs planning. We have Bob Johnston with us, and without any further ado, I'm Tim Markle, Director of the Southern Regional Center. Rose Cutting is here from Aiming for Acceptance in Fenimore, and Bob is here with a number of hats. Entrepreneur, fantastic, knowledgeable person on finances, and part of the board for Autism Society of America. It just keeps getting better and better, Bob. The more I know you, you just get better and better. So thank you so much for being here tonight.
You're too much, buddy. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate your letting me come in and share my experience with everybody. I'm going to try and share my screen here. Hopefully I can do this correctly. There we go. Okay, you should be seeing a junior golf pro on your screen. Hopefully you are.
Absolutely.
Okay, so again, my name is Bob Johnston, and I'm an advocate for the kids. I come to this position of advocacy, I guess, from two different perspectives. First off, the evening of August 23rd of 1975, I was standing in between parallel parked cars waiting for the traffic to clear so that I could walk across the street and meet some friends in a pub. And driver ran into the first of the parked cars, excuse me, pushed them together, and I was caught in between. The first hospital that night recommended amputation, so I asked to be transferred for a second opinion. Eventually, I convinced the doctors at the second hospital to give me a chance. And so far, I've had 22 orthopedic reconstruction surgeries on my legs, to include bone grafts from both hips. My right tibia and right fibula had been rebuilt twice. My right ankle's replaced. I've had 4 knee replacements, and the list goes on. My right leg was in a full leg cast initially for 14 months, followed by an additional 6 months in a full leg brace. So because of all that experience, I've been able to develop a pretty good understanding of life with a physical disability. Also, my son, who you see in these pictures, was diagnosed with autism when he was about 2.5, 3 years old. So I have a pretty good understanding of the challenges that we face as parents as well. So I understand disability as both a parent and a patient. Today, I'm, I guess you could say, very heavily invested in the disability community. As Tim said, I'm a member of the board of directors for the Autism Society of America. I'm a past president of the Autism Society of Greater Wisconsin, parent representative on the Governor's Council for Autism. I'm a member of the Academy of Special Needs Planners, the founder of Special Needs Planning LLC, Community Resource Network. I'm a former member of the board for the Ability Center, and I'm the special care financial planner for West Point Financial Group, which is an office of Mass Mutual here for the state of Wisconsin. Every night, I try to be home by about 9 o'clock so that I can spend some time with my son as he reads books. I try to use that time to build on the bond between us, because I want to kind of reflect on the events of the day in hopes that whatever I've done may, help his future somehow. Because I worry a lot about what his future is going to be like, and I want to make sure that it's going to be okay. Just like when you got your diagnosis, when we got our diagnosis on my son, our world changed. We felt as though there wasn't really anything that we could control. And I really think that sort of concept of control is important in this situation, because as parents, we need to know that there are things that we can control about our children's future, that there's things that we can have a good effect on. And I guess that's kind of what's brought us here today, is to talk a little bit about ways that we can make their life a little bit more secure. So our agenda for today is going to cover 7 items. We'll talk a little bit about the basics of government benefits. In my world, there's a pretty significant difference between general estate planning and special needs estate planning, but it all starts with what's important to you. And then how you communicate those goals. We'll talk a little bit about funding the trust, and then ultimately talk a little bit about starting the planning process. In terms of basics, the good news is that the government, I'm going to rearrange something here so that I can see a little bit better. The government provides a number of programs that are designed to enhance our quality of life, that are all financially based on financial need. So the good news is that these programs are available. The bad news is that if somebody were to leave a significant amount of assets to the beneficiary over and above their limits, then it may jeopardize their future eligibility to continue to receive those benefits. For example, here in the state of Wisconsin, we have Medicaid that's commonly called the Katie Beckett program. And there are limitations on that program that if Uncle Paul were to leave a lot of money to the child, that could cause problems. So let's start with the beginning in mind here and talk a little bit about some terms that I think might help understand the world that we live in. Is really, I see it as a struggle between need and affordability. The problem is that we need to be able to provide quality of life and lifetime of care, but we can only do it on very limited resources, because the government says that anybody that wants government benefit cannot have assets more than $2,000 in their name. Now, most of the time, people are aware of those benefits or aware of that $2,000 limit when it comes time to checking their parents into a nursing home. Because if they want Medicaid or Medicare government support to help pay for that nursing home visit, they can't have assets over $2,000. So they spend down those assets. That's the spend down theory. Well, that law also applies to our kids. And, I've never, in all the years that I've been doing this now, I guess about 20 years, I've never found anybody that can survive on $2,000. And I'm talking about $2,000 period for the rest of their life. It's just very, very difficult, particularly when we need to look at affecting quality of life and lifetime of care, which becomes very difficult if we don't have assets over $2,000. So we're going to talk a little bit about some legal and financial sorts of concepts and how they apply in the special needs estate planning area versus general estate planning area. First off, let's talk about wills and trusts. A will is basically your statement to the court of what you want to have happen to your stuff when you die. And you designate somebody in that will to be in charge of that. That person is called an executor. Also, there is another estate planning document called a trust. And the person in the trust is called the trustee. So the executor is to the will as the trustee is to the trust. Now, the good news about a will is that you still have an opportunity to say what you want to have happen to your stuff. The bad news is that a will can be contested. So if you're in a bar talking to your cousin Billy about, something, and then you pass away, cousin Billy could say, well, years ago I was talking to Bob and he said that I get this in his will. And somebody else says, well, no, he told me that I was going to get that. It can be contested in court. Whereas a trust is its own legal operating entity. We've got an executor that's in charge of that, of administering the document. And if it says it's in the trust, it can't be contested. So I'm kind of a believer in trusts. Now, there's a few different kinds of trusts that we'll talk about. Revocable trust and irrevocable trust, and then first person and third person trust. So let's talk a little bit about those terms. What's the difference between a revocable trust and an irrevocable trust? Well, if you think of a trust as a cardboard box, I think that's a good starting point. So think of a trust as a cardboard box. You just title stuff into the name of the trust. You put stuff in a cardboard box. Same concept. It's just a titling mechanism. So I've got a revocable trust. That means that anything that I put into the trust, I can pull back out of the trust. So I've got, say, a marionette. I got Pinocchio with some strings on it, okay? And I put Pinocchio into the box. The strings are still attached. I can pull Pinocchio back out of the box. It's a revocable trust. I can pull it back out and I can title it back into my name if I want. With an irrevocable trust, I have Pinocchio over the box. I cut the strings. Pinocchio falls into the box. And now I can't pull Pinocchio back out because it's an irrevocable trust. The assets are titled into the name of the trust and they can't be pulled back out again. So it's irrevocable. Ultimately, that's the kind of trust that eventually we want to have for the child with special needs, so that in the future, The assets can't be pulled back out again by the trustee of the future to use that money to buy a Corvette or go to the Bahamas or something like that. So now we're talking then about first person and third person. You'll hear those terms. A first person trust is funded with money that belongs to the person, versus a third person trust. That money is funded by a third person, somebody other than the beneficiary. There's pretty significant differences between them. Most of the time, we end up working with a third person trust, where those assets come from another entity and into the trust. And that way, then there's no Estate Recovery Act. In other words, if I'm in an accident, which I've been, and if I had gotten a settlement and put that money into a trust, when I passed away, that money left over would be used to pay back the state. That's called estate recovery. Whereas in a third person trust, there's no estate recovery. So most of the time, people like to work with third person irrevocable supplementary special needs trust. Guardianship, what does that mean? When the child becomes 18, you potentially would be able to file with the court to become the guardian for your child, which means that then you accept that legal responsibility. Now, when you get into court, to actually sit in front of the judge and get that stuff figured out, there's going to be somebody else sitting at the table next to you. That person is the guardian ad litem, and their responsibility is to be the representative of your child. They're really not meant to be an adversary, so don't see them as being an adversary. They're just trying to make sure legally that everything is being done appropriately to make sure that the child is going to be properly represented, if you will, by you as the guardian ad litem. Most of the time, it's a real easy process, and the attorneys that I work with will be able to walk us through that without any problem at all. But some of the legal terms that you may come across when we start doing planning would be guardianship and guardian ad litem, a revocable trust versus an irrevocable trust, and first person and third person funding. But again, remember that a trust is a cardboard box. It's just stuff that you put into. In and of itself, the trust is not an account. It doesn't earn interest or rate of return or anything like that. It's just a container that we title stuff into. So the original question is, how are we going to provide quality of life and lifetime of care if the person can only have $2,000 in their name? The answer is the special needs trust. And you've heard me use some of these terms now: irrevocable, supplementary. What do those mean? The irrevocable, we talked about that. Supplementary means that the assets in the trust are used to supplement government benefit. Here in the state of Wisconsin and in other states as well, once the child becomes 18 years old, they potentially qualify for SSI, roughly $860 a month. Well, $860 a month is supposed to cover food, clothing, and shelter. And chances are it's not going to be enough money to do that. So the money in the trust can be used to supplement that government benefit, not replace it, just supplement that government benefit, so that then we have a better chance of satisfying quality of life and lifetime of care. Now, it's really important to understand that the child is not an owner of the trust. The child has no control over those assets. The child is strictly a beneficiary of the trust and receives the benefit of those assets. What do I mean by that? If you are an owner, you have control. If you have control and there's more than $2,000 in that trust, then you've lost your eligibility. Whereas if you are a beneficiary, then the trust can pay for the groceries at Pick and Save, or the trust can buy a car, or the trust can buy a house. The trust can do anything that you and I can do because it's its own legal operating entity with its own social security number, identification numbers. But that way, then the beneficiary receives the benefit of those assets without having any control, and therefore then doesn't lose their eligibility to continue to receive the $860 a month from SSI or your Social Security benefit if you're already receiving Social Security and you retire, and then your child can potentially receive half of that benefit. Now, the special needs trust, what's really cool about it is you're going to have an opportunity to meet with an attorney, and you can put language in that document that is very, very specific without being restrictive. For example, in my son's trust. Now, my son, his name is Harley, and he is our only child. He's the main event. So if I wanted to be the trustee of his trust, that's fine. I am, as a matter of fact. If you want to be the trustee of your child's trust, that's fine. But there can be language in there that talks about divorce, asset levels. For example, years ago, before my son was 18, I had my brother-in-law as the trustee of my son's trust. But Pete is married to my wife's sister. And there's language in the trust back then that said that if Pete and Pam ever get divorced, then Pam becomes the trustee. Asset levels. There's language that we could put in there that says that if asset levels in the trust get above a certain level, then the trustee has to bring in a fiduciary to help, kind of look over their shoulder and make sure that the right decisions are made. For example, growing up on my mom's side of the family, her father was an attorney in Chippewa Falls. Everybody knows where Chippewa Falls is now because of Titanic, but she was from Chippewa Falls. And Grandpa was a pretty good attorney. I mean, back in the day, he was a pretty good attorney. As I guess even by today's standards, he would be considered a pretty good attorney. Before he died, he bought 2 sections of land in Minnesota and turned it into farmland. It was a big corporate farm. And half of those farms were set up in a trust to be able to take care of Grandma for as long as she lived. And the other half of those trusts, the money was put in a trust, the Harold Emerson Stafford Education Trust, that helped to pay for the education of his kids and his kids' kids. So the good news for me, I guess, was that when it came time for college, all I had to do was call over to Joe Redwine, who was the trustee over at First Wisconsin Trust Company, and say, "Hey, Joe, this is Bob Johnston. I'm calling for the Harold Stafford, Education Trust, and based on tuition to Marquette, he would send out a check." Well, personally, I ended up going to school in Eau Claire on a music scholarship, of all things. I know Tim will find that hard to believe, but it's true. So I didn't really need that money, but just the same, I called over there and got it. My folks were divorced when I was young, so I would get that money and then I'd gift it to my mom and she would use it to keep us going and stuff. My point is, it's good, I think, to put names in the trust of people that might provide the sort of support, as opposed to name or characteristics, as opposed to names of the. Here's my example. I'm getting tongue-tied on you. First Wisconsin Trust Company doesn't exist anymore. So if you write First Wisconsin Trust Company into your trust document as a trustee, and 2-3 generations later, that trust administrator isn't available anymore, the people of the future are going to be concerned about what they're supposed to do. So instead, list characteristics. So you want somebody in the future, if there's going to be providing some sort of support for this trust, you want this person in the future, or this entity in the future, to have these particular characteristics. I want them to have $30 million in assets under management. I want them to have 10 years worth of trust administration. I want them to have whatever characteristics you think are appropriate. You can bake that language into the trust document so that in the future, it reacts however you want it to react. So we can build what I call trigger points into the trust. And we'll have plenty of time to talk about that kind of stuff. And you'll have more time to talk with the attorney too, about what trigger points you think you might want to bake into the document so that it will be prepared to react in the future however you want it to react. For example, when my son passes away, what's going to happen with that money? It's going to be equally distributed to his then living first cousins. And it says that in the trust. So, we can take steps initially in the preparation of this document to make sure that it is very specific without being restrictive, and it will act in the future the way that we want it to act. So we've got an irrevocable supplementary special needs trust. We've got the trust figured out. We know who the trustee is going to be. We know, what if Pete and Pam get divorced? We've got all that stuff figured out. Now we've got to talk a little bit about funding the trust, okay, as they say. There's a few different ways that we can fund the trust. We can put real estate in there, investments, retirement funds, life insurance. There's something out now called the ABLE Act. How do those work? Real estate, investments, and retirement funds can all be good, but I don't know that I would use them as the primary funding mechanism in a trust because those values fluctuate pretty significantly. Back in 2008, when we had that credit crunch, real estate values were in half. 401ks became 201ks, investments, tanked significantly. And if you needed X amount of dollars in the trust to be able to provide benefit to the child when you're not around to take care of them anymore, and all of a sudden there's half of that available, or I can't sell the house, then we got a problem on our hands. So typically those first three are maybe elements of money that we would put into the trust, but chances are they're not going to be primary elements. Another problem with retirement funds too is that retirement funds have a chronological age associated with them. Remember, when you get to be 59 and a half and you can start taking money out of your IRA, or when you get to be 72 and you have to start taking your required minimum distribution, it's important to remember that a trust does not have a chronological age. So typically the IRS does not like having retirement funds in a trust because they want to be able to get their tax when the beneficiary is whatever age that's not necessarily the age of the trust. Now, a lot of times too, when you put retirement funds in the trust, it immediately cashes out, and then you have to pay all the taxes associated with that, and you accelerate to the higher income tax brackets on a trust. So, from an economic standpoint, it's probably not a good idea to put retirement funds into one of these trusts either. But ABLE accounts are gaining a lot of steam lately. An ABLE account is basically an account that the beneficiary can hold in their name, and it can have more than $2,000 in it, and it will not jeopardize their eligibility to continue to receive the government benefit. That way, then, the beneficiaries can get an understanding of how money works. Now, there's some restrictions associated with ABLE accounts, so let's talk a little bit about how those work. Generally, they're referred to as a 529A account, A standing for ABLE. They're patterned after the 529 educational account. Here in the state of Wisconsin, we have the EdVest account, where money in the account is used to pay for education. Money in an ABLE account is used to pay the expenses associated with living a life with a disability. And just with a 529 plan, the ABLE account cannot receive more than $15,000 a year. There's a limit here for the state of Wisconsin that account cannot grow to more than $330,000, and the amount of principal cannot be more than $100,000. Now, the good news is here in the state of Wisconsin, you have your choice of whatever state programs you want to be able to adopt. In other words, Wisconsin does not have its own ABLE account. So what you need to do is you need to go to the ABLE National Resource Center. There's the website there on your screen, ABLENRC, ABLE National Resource Center.org. When you click on that, eventually you want to look at participating states. Look, some of the drag down menus there, get started, participating states. You'll see a map of the United States with each state being outlined in either green or gray. The green states are active, the gray states are not active. So you can click on Minnesota and see if you like how the Minnesota plan works. Or you can click on New Jersey. A lot of people seem to like Ohio the best. So click on Ohio and you can take a look at Ohio. And then you just follow the links that are on that page through to that plan, and they'll walk you through opening up the account and get back to you and stuff like that. Now, the small print is always the devil is in the details on these, right? There is the Medicaid payback, the estate recovery. Remember, I used that term earlier in a first-person trust, the estate recovery. That exists in an ABLE account. And what that means is from the date that the account is open through until the date that the beneficiary passes away, the amount of Medicaid that will have accrued needs to be paid back to the state when the beneficiary passes away. So if you're hoping that the money is going to go from the ABLE account to then living first cousins or siblings or something like that, chances are there's not going to be any money left over in the ABLE account when the beneficiary passes away because of that estate recovery. So that's fine. Just keep the amount of money level, a little bit lower, and make sure that you're using all the money for, pre-planning of funerals or whatever it is before the beneficiary dies, so that then if you want a little bit to go back to the government to pay them back, great. But if you don't, then, there won't be any money left because you will have used it for pre-planning and all the other expenses. Now, they recently added another kind of layer to the ABLE account because a lot of these kids are working and they want to be able to save in a way that will not jeopardize their eligibility because of that $2,000 law. So there's an aspect of it now called able to work, which means that the person that has the ABLE account, our special needs individual, our beneficiary, if they're working at, wherever, McDonald's or Arby's or whatever they're doing, they can deposit their earnings into the ABLE account if their gross income tax for that taxable year is less than $12,760 here for the state of Wisconsin. In Hawaii and Alaska, there's different terms. What that figures to is about $1,063.33 per month that they can deposit automatically into the ABLE account. And as long as the amount of deposits does not exceed that $100,000, they're going to continue to be able to receive their SSI Medicaid benefit. And then down the road, get access to these monies to be able to supplement their need, just like they would assets in the trust. But again, understand that with an ABLE account, there is that estate recovery aspect to that account. And that aspect does not exist in the typical third-person trust. So most of the time I find that people, while they do like ABLE accounts, I think they're also well off to get a third-person special needs or irrevocable supplementary trust, because that'll do the same thing as an ABLE account. It doesn't have any state limits, and more importantly, it doesn't have any Estate Recovery Act. So life insurance. A lot of people use life insurance as a general rule because we can set it up so that the amount of premium that it takes to keep that policy going on a monthly basis can be a very budgetable sort of an amount. But most of the time, people like life insurance because it pays directly to the trust tax-free. And tax-free can be really nice when you're talking big numbers of how much it's going to take to be able to support your child when you're not around to take care of them anymore. So 9 times out of 10, life insurance is used as the primary funding mechanism for special needs trusts. Are you motioning to me, Tim? Okay.
No, I have this little gnat that keeps flying around my computer screen and it's driving me absolutely nuts. So honest, there really is a bug that is flying around. So just pay no attention to me, Bob.
Okay, fine. Now, most of the time we use what's called a survivorship policy, which is kind of a unique policy that a lot of people aren't aware of. It's 2 people on the same policy. And the actuaries really like that kind of a policy because it's 2 people on the same policy as opposed to 1 person on 1 policy. It's much more efficient, but it's set up to provide benefit, to pay out, to send money to the trust when the second person passes away. So typically we have both parents on a survivorship policy, mainly because also, as long as one parent is alive, we know the child's going to be taken care of. We really need to have money in the trust when the second one passes away. Now, we use these kind of policies a lot too in business planning for buy-sell agreements and estate tax relief and charitable giving and stuff like that. But in terms of special needs planning, chances are the survivorship policy is the most efficient. And they can be developed in either universal or whole life to be able to use the dividend to pay the premium, maybe 16, 17, 18 years down the road, so that you don't have that out-of-pocket premium anymore too. Mass Mutual is really very significant player in that area because we have the industry's largest dividend on an annual basis. And after about 17, 18 years from the date of inception for that policy, we can turn on that automated payment process, and then you don't have to worry about paying the premium anymore. The policy just kind of takes care of itself. Years ago, when I started doing this, I was always wondering, how much are we going to need for life insurance? So it was a big question that I got from people was, okay, Bob, I'm with you so far, but how do I know how much money I need to be able to take care of Harley or Betty Lou or whatever? How am I going to know that? So I developed something. You're going to have to go to my website, okay? Go to snp-llc.com. And when you get to that main site, over the top, you'll see some links. You want to click on the tools link. It'll be off to the right a little bit. And then drag down from that to links. And then the first link that comes up will be special needs worksheet. So the general website, snp-llc.com, look for the tools tab along the top and then drag down to links. And then the first link is the special needs worksheet. When you go to that, you're going to see this. It's a live Excel spreadsheet that's all itemized for you so that you can determine roughly how much you want to budget for any number of different items. Care assistance or rent or entertainment or sporting events or whatever it is. A little bit farther down, you're going to look at years to protect. I think it's line 131, I want to say offhand. Years to protect is roughly how many years you feel as though your child is going to survive you. They're going to live another 25 years, another 30 years, whatever it is, put that number in. And then just below that, you're going to be able to put in an inflation factor for each of those years. Because the cost of a loaf of bread is more tomorrow than it is today because of inflation. Most economists would probably counsel you at about 3% inflation, but if you want to do a little bit less, you want to do a little bit more, it's up to you. These are your numbers. It's going to be customized specifically to whatever it is you think are appropriate. Also, you'll see on there a line item to be able to put in the government benefit or the income that you're receiving or other inheritance or something like that. So it's pretty detailed. And then eventually we'll be able to work off of that to decide what the next steps are going to be. So we've got the trust figured out. We got a pretty good understanding of how much money we're going to need to put in the trust to take care of the child when we're not around to take care of them anymore. There's a lot of other things, though, that are really important. And we need to find a way to be able to communicate those other values to the other caregiver, because communication is very, very important. How are we going to communicate what's really important? For example, Uncle Paul, when my son was born, Uncle Paul, my wife's sister Paul, consistently sent us those triple E savings bonds. They're $25 savings bonds. And about 48 years later, they're worth $26. They're not a real good investment, but thank God for people like Uncle Paul that want to do something to help take care of our kids. Well, so what we need to do then is send a letter. Dear so-and-so, I know you would never do anything to intentionally cause problems for my child. Insert child's name here, kind of a thing. But understand that there is this federal law that says that if Harley ever has more than $2,000, then he's going to lose his Medicaid support, or he's going to lose his government benefit. So in the future, if you want to send savings bonds, you want to send money, just write out a check to his trust. It's just a lot easier that way. Because I think people want to do something, they just need to understand the right way to do it. Now, another real important document that you can use to communicate important things to other people is what we call the letter of intent. Think of it as the owner's manual for the child. Now, my son, growing up as a kid, just like most kids, I think probably loved Elmo videos. You can't get enough Elmo videos. Well, the problem with it was for my son was Elmo Palooza. And I don't know if it was John Stewart who was in the video or what the deal was, but as soon as you put in Elmopalooza, it caused a meltdown for my son. I think it was because of kind of a different opening than the traditional Elmo videos. But whatever it was, I mean, it was a real problem. So if my son is now over at Pete and Pam's house and they put in Elmopalooza, that's going to cause a problem. Another idea here for you. When we first got that diagnosis, we went into the pediatrician that my wife was working with at the time. He was our pediatrician. And we said, you know, we got this preliminary diagnosis from birth to 3 that he may have autism. And the doctor, you know, if I hadn't been there in the examining room with him when he said it, I don't know that I would believe it, but I was. And his exact words were, "There's no way your son could be autistic. He's too attractive." And I thought, that just doesn't make sense. You know, it just doesn't make sense. So from then on, we found a new pediatrician. And in his letter of intent, I said, don't see this doctor in the future because he doesn't understand autism, obviously. He doesn't understand disabilities. So I don't want my son to go see that pediatrician anymore because they don't understand really what's going on. Some people will like to do a video letter of intent where they would, instead of putting it in writing, they just do a video of it, they digitize it, and then they can send the digital video out. It doesn't matter to me how you do it, what format you use. I just think it's important to have a letter of intent. Now, it's not a legal document. You don't have to worry about getting it notarized like a will or anything like that. But I think it's every bit as important as any document that you'll come across in this process, because it really is the owner's manual for the child. You know, feed them vanilla ice cream. Don't play Elmopalooza. You know, they go to bed at a certain time. They like, you know, cheeseburgers from, or, you know, whatever, you know, they have food sensitivities or whatever, you know, is specific to that child is information that can go into the letter of intent that has a real positive effect on the quality of life and lifetime of care. The letter of intent, I've got some here at the office, and when we get together, if we get together, I'll be able to give you some and we'll get that figured out. Now, years ago, when I started doing this work, this slide wasn't in my presentation because long-term care wasn't that big of a deal back then. Now, you're looking at, you know, $300 a day. That's a pretty big expense to take out of your estate. So a lot of times people use long-term care insurance to kind of build a brick wall around your estate so that the nursing home can't take all of your money. And instead, you're transferring that risk to the insurance company to be able to pay that cost. Remember, my wife used to be a flight attendant. Remember how, you know, you're on the plane and the flight attendant stands up in front and she says, you know, put the mask on yourself first before you put it on the child sitting next to you. That's really kind of the best analogy I can think of here for long-term care. You're putting the mask on yourself so that you're secure, and then everybody around you will feel a little bit more secure as well. Starting the planning process, just make sure that you're working with people that have an understanding of special needs work, whether it's financial people or estate planners or attorneys or whatever. You know, there's a lot of people that will say that they've done this or they've done that, but you really want to do some good research and push back. And, you know, how many clients have you worked with? How many special needs trusts have you done? Are you a member of the Academy of Special Needs Planners? I can't tell you how many problems I've had to fix over the years because some financial person thought that they could be an expert at this, and then they ended up, you know, prescribing the wrong strategy or something. It causes all sorts of problems. Work with people. You don't obviously have to work with me if you don't want to. I mean, I'm here to help, obviously, but, you know, just work with people that have experience to do this kind of a thing, because you're not going to discover those problems for another 2-3 generations later. And another 2-3 generations later is often too late, and it really can cause a lot of problems down the road. So work with people that really understand what's going on, but understand that you are the expert. It all starts with you. And we always want to try and affect quality of life and lifetime of care. So I can help you. Obviously, it's my financial specialty. I do not charge any consultation fees. That's true. I do not charge any consultation fees. So we can get together and talk for as many times as you want, as long as you want. I'll never send you a bill for consultation. I think that most people appreciate that, because when they go with the attorneys are on the clock and they're going to charge you accordingly. So I have plenty of time then with the families ahead of time to get you better prepared, so that when you go in to meet with the attorney, your time is most efficiently spent. Here's my contact information. That last line, the value of my life is measured in the value that I bring to others. That's my mantra. I sincerely believe in that. And I will do whatever I can to help you get from A to B or answer whatever questions. Give me a call. If I don't pick up the phone when you call, leave word on my voicemail, because that voicemail travels to me wherever I am. And if I'm up in Chippewa Falls, or I'm in Montana, or wherever I am, as long as I have my cell phone with me, that voicemail will find me. And I promise you, I'll call you back before the end of the day, and we'll get going and answer whatever questions I have.
Even if you're in Southwest Wisconsin?
I can handle that.
All right, then.
I can handle that. So thank you again, Tim and Rose. It's good to see you again. Thank you very much for having me here. Are there any questions that anybody has that I can help with at this point? I know I've laid out quite a bit of information. If there's any questions, please speak up.
So we do have a question so I'm going to go back to gallery view soon, if you can turn off your sharing, and then we can see each other who may want to unmute. But can you speak to like the trusts that you can get through Life Navigators or WISPACT? I know WISPACT is a pretty big name around here.
Yeah. They are trust administrators, okay? So co-trustees, if you will. They will develop a trust for you if you want. Most of the time, they'll give a rebate to the attorney to help develop, to defray some of that cost. But typically, the trust that they do is really no different than a trust that you'll get from a good special needs attorney. WISPACT and Life Navigators get involved in administration of those trusts and in helping people through various questions for their life. Life Navigators, that's where the name comes from. They'll charge a little bit more for trust administration, but that's because they provide a little bit more service, a little bit more in-depth service to the family or to the beneficiary. Many times people use either of those organizations as contingent trustees for after mom and dad pass away. They need somebody to step in to be able to manage that trust when mom and dad aren't around, and either WISPAC or Life Navigators are used as those contingent trustee designations.
Bob, can you speak a little bit to when there's other children in the family besides the special needs child, as you start this whole planning process, how does caring for what I guess you would call neurotypical children play into this as well?
Well, they potentially could be part of the caregiving committee, if you will, to help, guide the trustee. They could potentially be co-trustees in the future. A lot of times those siblings provide very, very valuable input to the life and times of the beneficiary, and information that the trustee may not be aware of. So I think it's incumbent on parents to look at potential roles that the trustee may have, that those kids may have. Now, sometimes we get into sibling rivalry, and the beneficiary might think, well, you never let me do this when I was young, and now you're controlling my money, and you're not going to let me do it that way. So a lot of times I like to use these WISPAC Life Navigators as co-trustees, because then it gives the sibling an out to be able to say, yes, I think we can probably do that. However, we have to run it by so-and-so so that legally it's done appropriately, and they're going to help us through that. It kind of gives them a shoulder to be able to lean on and talk ideas off of. Somebody had a question there. I saw pooled trusts. A pooled trust is a collection of individual trusts that is managed as a larger entity, and then you own your percentage of that pool, so to speak. Now, some pooled trusts can be great. Other pooled trusts can be a bit of a challenge. What you need to look for in that trust is the small print that discusses what's going to happen to that money when the beneficiary passes away. WISPACT is very good. Life Navigators, I believe, is pretty good as well, in that it has language in it that says that the money can leave the trust when the beneficiary passes away and go to siblings or some other organization or entity. Most pooled trusts have language in there, though, that says when the beneficiary passes away, the money stays in the pool and is shared with the other pool members. So pooling is just a way of aggregating all of those assets together into one bigger pool, because Warren Buffett gets better deals on his investments than you and I do, right? So they pool all those assets together because then they have more money to work with, and then you maintain your share of those assets. But again, you want to make sure that when the beneficiary passes away, that the money can leave the pool and go to a sibling or some other organization if that's a concern. With WISPACT and with Life Navigators, I know for sure that WISPACT has that built into their document, and I'm pretty sure that Life Navigators does as well. But the local banks that offer pooled trusts, many times the money has to stay in the pool, and that might be a problem. You know, I'm not saying it is. It's an individual decision.
So I want to make sure that I'm not sure I was asking the other question perfectly correct. Hopefully it answered the question about other children besides special needs child. So let's just say that I have one special needs child and I set him up with the special needs trust.
Okay.
And I'm having relatives give to that trust. But I have another child that I also want to make sure that they get taken care of too.
Mhm.
But they're not special needs, so it's not going to be a special needs trust. So can I have set up a regular trust for them and a special needs trust for my child, or
Sure.
how do you do that?
Yeah, it just depends on how detailed and you know how specific you want to be in terms of your estate plan. Yes, many times we'll have one trust for the family, and then language in that trust that says that when the family passes away, eventually the share that goes to the child with special needs goes to their special needs trust as opposed to the individual. But for neurotypical kids, the money can go directly to that child because we don't have to worry about preserving their eligibility for government benefit. Now, there can also be language in either trust, whether a special needs or a regular trust, that says when the child gets to a certain age, or you know, the Jenny McCarthy syndrome, there is a pill out there that's going to cure it, right? When that happens, if the beneficiary does not need the protections of the trust, then the money can be doled out at, you know, age 35, they can get a third, age 40, they can get a third, and age 45, they can get the remaining, whatever. You know, we can put terms like that in the trust to be able to handle it. But just as you can have a special needs trust for a child with a disability, it's very, very common to have a trust for the neurotypical family, for the neurotypical child as well. It makes the estate planning that much more efficient, because then the trustee or the executor does not have to go in front of the court for probate and lose, you know, 3 to 6% and maybe a year and a half to be able to do it. So yeah, it just depends on how efficient you want it to be. I hope that
couple other questions.
Yeah.
One, are you able to share your PowerPoint slides or not? I know that
No,
you
no.
are. That's what I thought.
I'm sorry, I can't. They're all copyrighted. And,
Okay.
But you know, I'm available. People are, you know, certainly welcome to give me a call.
That's my follow-up question. Knowing that you are as human as the rest of us, and that you need to eat and keep a house over your head. I love the fact that consultations are free.
Uh-huh.
When would a cost be involved? When do you start?
When
would parents, if they contact you and they consult with you, when would they start to have to think about paying for some services?
Well, they're not going to have to worry about paying for services from me. Now, which leads to the question of how I get paid. I think that's, you know, kind of what you're asking about.
Yeah, because if you're being able to eat and sleep without getting paid, I'd really like to get a piece of that.
Yeah. Well, I get a commission by the companies that I represent. So if we're looking at a life insurance policy, typically those life insurance carriers will pay a commission to the agents that represent them. Or if we're looking at asset management, then I do a lot on an advisory standpoint. So I get a percentage of the amount of money that I manage on an annual basis. If you're doing fund direct mutual funds, then typically those funds have a front end load, as they call it. And part of that cost goes for administration of the funds, and some of that goes to commissions for me. But I do everything by commission. Years ago, when I got the appropriate licenses to be able to charge people $500 an hour to sit down and talk to Bob, I soon realized that we live in a world where there's a consistent struggle between need and affordability. And you would rather use that money for casing-free diets, or you got to fix the car, or the refrigerator just broke, or whatever it is. And so it gets in the way of making sure that the kids are taken care of. And, my family's fine. I'm okay. And I'll be fine. I sleep at night just fine. I want to make sure that the kids are taken care of. That's how I give back.
Other questions, please feel free to unmute yourself if you would like. We do have another question. Do you do out-of-state work, or are you only licensed in like Wisconsin?
I'm licensed in a bunch of different states, and I'm a member of the Academy of Special Needs Planners, which is a national organization, a national collection, if you will, of insurance and financial and legal people. Mass Mutual, which I'm part of, has a national network of financial planners like me. So if I'm working with somebody here and they move to Hawaii, I'm going to refer you to Kirk over in Hawaii, who I know. Or if you're moving to another state, chances are there's another advisor in my system that I can refer you to, or I can find people through the academy that I can refer you to as well. But I'm licensed in a bunch of different states, so I can help with that.
In the situation where a family would like more time with regard to questions or setting up, are you set up to accept waiver funding from Children's Long-Term Support for consultation services?
No, I'm not, but you don't have to worry about that because I'm not going to charge you consultation fees anyway.
Cool.
And I have a Zoom feature on my website and on my email called Calendly. And if you go to my bio on the website, down towards the bottom there, you'll see a link for Calendly, which gives you direct access to my calendar so that you can schedule a time that's convenient on my calendar. And then as a confirmation, my system will automatically send you a Zoom link. And you're in the calendar and we can get together to talk on Zoom and we'll get it all squared away. And, Mass Mutual is very, very electronic. So we can do everything from underwriting, and I can do everything online if we need to. My car gets good mileage. I can come and meet you wherever we are too. So, it's a personal business. So I want to make sure that I'm accessible.
Well, and I can vouch for the fact that you have traveled to the Dells, you traveled to Madison I've sent you many places. And so I greatly appreciate that.
Thank you.
Any other questions at this point? You can feel free to unmute if you would like. I'll see the little red arrow go away or the red microphone go away, and then you can speak if you want, or in the chat. Either way is fine.
I want to know how Bill Murray did that no-look putt. That might be a different Bill Murray.
Possibly a different Bill Murray. Possibly.
I saw that at Pebble Beach over the weekend.
Oh, so a lot of thanks in the chat box. So with that, I will add my own thanks. If you wanted to hang out, Bob, I will stop the recording in just a minute so that we can then just say goodbye. But thank you all for being here. I will put together some resources based on the chat box, which a lot of it is based on Bob's glossary, which I found very helpful and that I hadn't found before tonight. So I learned a lot just from going to the glossary. So I will make sure to compile some of those along with Bob's contact information and get that sent out to all of you. Thank you so much for being here. Be sure to check out Rounding Up Resources for our next month in our next presentation in a month. So thank you so much.
Thank you for coming. Good to see you, Meg.
Great.